There have been a lot of great factions throughout wrestling history. You just have to look at names like the NWO, D-Generation X, or the Four Horsemen for evidence of this. That said, even within those heavyweight groups, there are always the clear stars and the clear mid-card players. That's why it's almost unheard of then for a group to feature four men who all ended up becoming top-tier superstars. Yes, in the early to mid-2000s, there was no one in WWE who ruled the roost more than the collective made up of Triple H, Ric Flair, Randy Orton, and Batista. And while during those initial years, the latter two were clearly positioned as the up-and-comers, they've since gone on to reach success comparable to their mentors themselves, with this making them arguably the most successful faction in wrestling history. So, how did it all happen? Well, join us today then as we take a deep dive into the group's entire history from start to finish in Line in the Sand, the Evolution story. But first, a bit of backstory. During the late 90s, there was a series of WWE superstars who rose to prominence, with the biggest names among these generally being considered to be Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Mick Foley, Kane, and Triple H. Come the early 2000s though, the former three would either be done with wrestling or just about done, and with the Big Red Machine at that point taking up more of an upper mid-card role, this left the Game as the top star in the company. And so, with both the top position on screen and the backstage power that came with being in a relationship with the boss's daughter Stephanie McMahon then, Triple H decided in 2002 that he wanted to solidify his greatness by building a stable around himself, something that could match up to the legacy of the old territory days where the Four Horsemen had reigned supreme. Luckily then, the top name in the Horsemen, Ric Flair, was in WWE at that point, and after undergoing something of a crisis of confidence as a result of his recent time in WCW, he would be taken under the wing of the Game who, always having idolized Slick Rick during his youth, would befriend him backstage and help him to build his belief in himself back up again. Soon after this, and the new union would be made official on screen when, at September 22, 2002's Unforgiven, Flair would help Triple H to retain his World Heavyweight title during a match with Rob Van Dam, with him from there acting as his full-time on-screen manager. Still, a stable can't be made up with just two men, and the Game, who already had a history of being involved in iconic groups before by this point, both on-screen with D-Generation X and off-screen with the Clique, knew this all too well. He also knew that in order to build to the future would have to be a part of what he was building. That was why, in the weeks that followed, both he and Flair would begin scouring the WWE roster, searching for the best up-and-coming prospects who they could groom to join their side. And in the end, these two men would be found in the form of Randy Orton and Mark Jindrak. Wait, what? Yes, it's true, the original plan for Evolution did not in fact see the Animal as its enforcer. No, instead, it was the former WCW rookie Jindrak who took that role at the behest of Vince McMahon himself, with the company even going as far as to film some test footage of the four together before deciding that he just didn't fit with the others. So, pivoting away from this then, Jindrak would instead be put in a tag team with Garrison Cade, while Triple H would suggest Dave Batista as an alternative for his group, with this ending up being the missing piece of the puzzle as, from there, everything finally clicked into place and they were all off to the races. That was how, after being drafted over from SmackDown to Raw during the winter of 2002, Batista would be taken under the wing of Flair too, as he became an on-screen manager for him during this time. And this of course soon led to all three men associating themselves together, with the fourth part of the group joining soon after, as on the January 20th, 2003 episode of The Red Brand, Randy Orton would assist them in a beatdown of Triple H's rival at the time, Scott Steiner. So now with everything solidified, the group would formally name themselves Evolution 2 weeks later, with the Game explaining this as being a reference to the fact that they featured the past, present, and future of wrestling within their ranks. Still, it wouldn't be all roses for the group during those early days as, shortly after their formation, the whole thing would be thrown into disarray when Batista suffered a tricep injury that put him on the shelf for nearly 8 months. Recognizing the special chemistry all of them had together though, the other three would fight to not have the Animal replaced during this time and instead work as a threesome while he was out recuperating. So for the remainder of 2003 then, that's just what they did, with Triple H feuding with Kevin Nash and Goldberg over the World Heavyweight title, while elsewhere, Ric Flair was proving he still had it when he scored a pinfall victory over Shawn Michaels at June 15th's Bad Blood. On top of this, the youngest member of the stable, Randy Orton, was beginning to make a name for himself around this time too, as the Legend Killer, a bratty up-and-comer who, in a show of disrespect, would take out older, more established figures at every turn. So powerful were the group, in fact, that at one point in the summer, they even tried to recruit Kane into the ranks, with this offer ending up being soundly rejected by the Big Red Machine as, from there, Evolution made his life a living hell, at one point forcing him to remove his mask for the first time after he lost a mask versus title match to the game. And while Triple H was doing this, Randy Orton was living up to his Legend Killer moniker when he got a win over HBK at September 21st's Unforgiven. Unfortunately though, it would be on that same night that his leader would finally fall to Goldberg, losing his world title in the process. So, out for revenge then, the next night on Raw, the now former champion would put out a $100,000 bounty for anyone who was willing to take the former WCW star out. And while many would try to snag this bounty over the next 3 weeks, they would all fail in the end, with it ultimately being left to a returning Batista to get the job done when he surprised the champ on the October 20th edition of Raw, laying him out, then Pillmanizing his ankle for good measure. But even this wasn't enough to get the belt back on the game come the time of the rematch at November 16th Survivor Series, as, despite all 3 other members of Evolution interfering throughout, Goldberg somehow managed to retain his title after 11 minutes and 44 seconds. Luckily then, Randy Orton was doing better elsewhere on the card that night as, earlier on in the show, he'd become the sole survivor of the 5-on-5 Team Bischoff vs. Team Austin match, a match that is still considered by many today to be the best Survivor Series elimination match in history. And after that, heading into the new year, the group would reach the full extent of their powers when at December 13th's Armageddon pay-per-view, Flair and Batista teamed up to win the World Tag Team titles from the Dudley Boys, while elsewhere, Orton was defeating Rob Van Dam for the Intercontinental title, and in the main event, Triple H was finally able to beat Goldberg to get his World Heavyweight title back. Yes, any momentary blips in the road seem to have passed them by now, as with 2004 rolling around, they, like all the most powerful stables before them, controlled all the gold on their brand. Moving forward then, they would flaunt this power and success at every turn, whether this be on-screen or off-screen, as by then, the partying antics of at least 3 of its members were becoming legendary. And while Triple H was also present for many of these evenings, as a teetotaler, he remained sober and focused on his next challenger throughout, a challenger that would soon see him have to confront a ghost of the past in the form of his old DX stablemate, Shawn Michaels. So when the time for their showdown came at the 2004 Royal Rumble in a last man standing match, the game was ready, and though he could not defeat his old friend on that night, he did take him to a no contest, this allowing him to retain his belt after neither man could answer a 10 count. And if that wasn't enough, elsewhere on the same card, Flair and Batista were successfully defending their tag titles against the Dudley Boys again, while in the Rumble match itself, Orton was putting on an impressive showing. After that was over though, each of the Evolution members began preparing for their WrestleMania programs, with this splitting the group into 2 units, as well on the undercard, Flair, Batista, and Orton would take on the reformed Rock and Sock Connection in a 3-on-2 handicap match. In the main event, Triple H would defend his world title against both Shawn Michaels and Chris Benoit in a triple threat match. And despite the earlier bout coming out a win for Evolution, the night would end with the Game losing his strap to Benoit, with this ultimately leading to all 3 men having a rematch at the following month's Backlash, where once again, the Canadian was able to fend off his challengers. So perhaps seeing that his leader was beginning to falter then, Randy Orton took this as an opportunity to take himself to the next level when, at that same Backlash pay-per-view on April 18th, he would have what at that point was probably the best match of his career when he took on Cactus Jack in a hardcore brawl. And though he did end up winning this and retaining his Intercontinental title in the process, in the end, it was less that and more the absolutely gruesome beating he was willing to take throughout it that earned him new levels of respect with both his peers and fans alike. Yes, by now, it seemed like the Legend Killer was being positioned as the company's next big breakout star, and so it only seemed like a matter of time before he would challenge Triple H over leadership of the stable. And so, recognizing this time was coming, Orton would slowly work his way up the singles ranks, waiting for the moment that he would get to challenge Benoit for the World Heavyweight title. Before he would get to do that though, Benoit got another one over on Evolution when, after teaming with Edge, he was able to take the World Tag Team titles away from Ric Flair and Batista. And as if that wasn't bad enough, at July 11th's Vengeance, the Rated R Superstar would also defeat Orton for his Intercontinental title too, leaving the stable without any gold for the first time since the turn of the year. It was clear then that something had to be done to get them back on top, and Triple H would start to make headway with this when, on the July 26th episode of Raw, he took on the Canadian Crippler one more time for the title in an Iron Man match. But what made this one even more interesting was that, earlier in that same night, Orton had won a battle royal that made him the next contender to that very belt, with this leading to a potentially interesting scenario where the two stablemates could have been facing off against each other at that August SummerSlam. In the end, though, that's not what happened, as Benoit would manage to retain once more here, with him then focusing himself entirely on preparing for the Legend Killers challenge at the upcoming pay-per-view. Despite his preparation for it, though, it was on that night that Orton was able to do what Triple H couldn't when he pinned the Canadian after 20 minutes and 8 seconds, becoming the youngest ever WWE World Champion in the process in a moment that, sadly, due to later events involving his opponent, has largely been scrubbed from company history. After that, dissension would start to rear its head within Evolution as, seeing as he was about to be usurped as the leader of the stable, Triple H kicked the new champion out the next night on Raw, giving him a thumbs down worthy of a Roman emperor, as from there, he, Flair, and Batista laid waste to the Legend Killer. And while this seemed to mark the beginning of the end for Raw's top group, it also marked the point where Randy was supposed to bloom into the company's next top star, with him defending his title against the Game at the following month's Unforgiven pay-per-view and losing in a screwy fashion. This all allegedly to set up a big WrestleMania rematch between the two. Before that could happen though, things would begin to cool off for the rookie, as a combination of apparent backstage issues as well as the rise of someone else entirely would mean that he would never get that big rematch for the title. No, instead, this would go to his former stablemate, Batista. Yes, as the months went on and Triple H continued to bask in his successes once more, he would begin to play increasing mind games with his opponents. And one of these games saw him pretend to be attacked by the Animal prior to a steel cage match with Chris Benoit on the November 22, 2004 episode of Raw, with this giving him an easy out from competing that night, as well as allowing the babyfaces to believe that Evolution was on the verge of imploding. Of course, it would later be revealed that this was far from the case, and that the remaining three superstars of the stable were just as strong as ever. That said, something unexpected did happen that night, as when fans thought that the student had turned on the teacher, they gave Batista a monster babyface reaction, something which Vince McMahon took careful note of as, by then, Orton had been getting more and more muted responses himself. So, quickly deciding to pivot, WWE would begin teasing a slow burn story over the next few months that saw the Animal gradually tease leaving Evolution and turn face for real this time, something which fans became more desperate to see as each week passed. And this story would hit its next major beat when, on the January 10, 2005 episode of Raw, Orton would face off against Batista in a number one contenders match, with the tease leading up to this being that maybe, just maybe, the Animal and the Game were going to have to meet in the ring one-on-one. That would have to wait for now though, as it would be the Legend Killer who would win this one, with the victory giving him a shot at the World Heavyweight title at the January 30th Royal Rumble. Yes, while it had originally been planned as the WrestleMania main event, it was clear to fans now that the company had shifted plans, as this once major feud was instead going to be blown off at the second biggest show of the year. And the champion would retain that night, of course, but more importantly than that, Batista would enter the Rumble match itself, something which he did against the wishes of his leader. And come the end of that match, he would even eliminate John Cena to win the whole thing after a spectacularly botched finish almost ruined the party. Still though, fans didn't really care about this, as the important thing was that it looked like they were finally getting the big showdown they wanted, Batista versus Triple H for the World Heavyweight title at WrestleMania 21. Of course, initially it wasn't as clear-cut as that though, as in winning the Rumble, the Animal actually had a choice of two world title matches at the Showcase of the Immortals. The Game on the Raw side, or JBL over on the SmackDown side. And this was why, in the weeks that followed, Triple H would try to convince his secret weapon not to face off against him, and instead challenge the Blue Brand's champion, arguing that by doing this, Evolution would be able to conquer the entire company's main event division. But by then, Batista had become too smart to not see through the champ's games, and so, after weeks of teasing, he would eventually make his decision on the February 21st edition of Raw, where, in a moment that echoed the Game's betrayal of Randy Orton the year prior, the Animal would give his mentor the thumbs down, all before powerbombing him through a table to a huge crowd response. Yes, it was one of the best turns WWE had pulled off in years, and instantly, Batista became the company's top babyface as fans waited with bated breath to see him finally end the Reign of Terror at WrestleMania. And when the time for that match finally came on April 3, 2005, the challenger would do just that, pinning the champion in the main event after 21 minutes and 34 seconds to hold the brand's top prize above his head for the first time. But once wouldn't be enough for him as it turned out, because he would go on to beat the game twice more at May's Backlash and June's Vengeance pay-per-views, with the latter bout seeing both men destroy each other inside Hell in a Cell for almost half an hour before Batista finally put down his opponent for good. And this effectively marked the end of Evolution then, as from there, the Animal would be drafted over to SmackDown, all while, elsewhere, Triple H would take some time off, and Ric Flair would turn babyface himself after winning the Intercontinental title. That said, the stable had certainly done its job in elevating all four men, as during its run, it had helped the Nature Boy to get his confidence back, solidified the game as one of WWE's top stars, and had made new stars out of both Batista and Randy Orton, each of whom would win multiple world titles and main event multiple WrestleManias in the years to come. Still, as each of them became a legend themselves, the question would always be asked, could fans ever expect to see a revival of the group? And as it happened, they got a tease of this on December 10, 2007, as it was then that, on the Raw 15th anniversary show, Orton would confront his three former stablemates and tell them that he still hadn't forgiven them for kicking him out of the group back in 2004, with this leading to a one-night reunion of sorts as, later that night, Triple H, Batista, and Flair would take on Orton, Edge, and Umaga in a six-man tag match. But that was only a one-time thing and not what fans really wanted to see from a reunion, of course. No, they wouldn't get that until 2014 when, after having left the company to go start a movie career, the Animal would make a return at that year's Royal Rumble, ostensibly to win the titular match and play the big babyface opponent to Randy Orton at the upcoming WrestleMania 30. Of course, that was the year of Daniel Bryan, however, and so, when Batista won the Rumble match over the fan favorite, it instantly turned him into the biggest heel in the company, something which forced WWE to change things up last minute and making the whole thing a triple threat match at the Showcase of the Immortals that saw Bryan eventually tap out the Animal to win the big one. Following this, though, Batista and Orton would remain aligned, and as the Legend Killer was already a member of Triple H's Authority stable at this point, this left an opening for all three men to be reunited once more. And that was how, on the April 14, 2014 episode of Raw, they would come to reform Evolution once more, as they from there set their sights on taking out the new kids on the block, The Shield. And this would lead to two absolutely stellar six-man tag matches in the months that followed, as at both Extreme Rules and Payback in May and June respectively, the Legends would put over the up-and-coming Hounds of Justice strong, with Ric Flair even making an on-screen return at one point to turn his back on his former teammates and give his personal endorsement to the babyfaces. But despite there still being plenty more juice left in the revival at this point, things would ultimately be cut short when, following the second bout with The Shield, Batista would ask for a shot at Daniel Bryan's WWE title, with this being subsequently refused and used as the kayfabe excuse for the Animal quitting the company once more. After that, things would go dark for the stable again. That was until the 1000th episode of SmackDown on October 16, 2018, where all four reunited for an in-ring segment that ultimately served to tease the eventual WrestleMania program between the Animal and the Game the next year. Yes, by then, Batista had decided to retire, but before he did, he wanted one more shot at his former friend. And after this match came and went at April 7th, 2019's WrestleMania 35, he would indeed hang up his boots for good, moving back over to his acting work in Hollywood. As it happened, though, this would also mark Triple H's last WrestleMania match to date too, with him seeming to have entered retirement fully now following a recent health scare. And with Ric Flair long since having called it a day by then as well, this has left Randy Orton as the only active member of Evolution still going, continuing to carry the flag for what the stable represented by helping to build a new star in Matt Riddle. And ultimately, that's what this was all about, building for the future, with that probably being the main reason why, all these years later, the group is still remembered as well as they are. So, let it be a mystery no longer then, because with 100% of their members being absolute legends of the wrestling industry and easy first ballot Hall of Famers to boot, It's easy to argue that, even when compared to the likes of the Four Horsemen and D-Generation X, Evolution might just be the greatest stable of all time. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.